Donald Trump and his good man Anthony Albanese share some common ground. Alright, picture this: Anthony Albanese, Australia's Prime Minister, has been trying to score a face-to-face meeting with Donald Trump like a teenager desperately sliding into their crush's DMs. 6 months of radio silence, folks. 6 months. And the critics? Oh, they've been having an absolute field day, practically writing Albanese's political obituary over what they're calling the snub of the century. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming: these two blokes might actually have more in common than you'd think. And no, I'm not talking about their shared love of spray tans or questionable hair choices. This is juicier than that. Quick favor, if you're loving this, hit that subscribe button and smash the notification bell to keep getting the latest updates on politicians around the world. Seriously, do it now. I'll wait. Done? Brilliant. Now back to the show. So let's set the scene. For half a year now, Albanese has been trying to arrange an in-person meeting with Trump at the White House. Half a year. That's longer than most Netflix series take to get renewed. And the Australian political commentariat has absolutely lost their minds over it. They're calling it everything from a diplomatic disaster to proof that Australia has somehow become irrelevant on the world stage. One columnist even suggested that our relationship with America is circling the drain faster than your motivation on a Monday morning. Dramatic much? But here's where it gets interesting, and trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this. The narrative that's been pushed is simple: Albanese doesn't have the clout, the charisma, or the connection to get Trump's attention. He's being ignored, overlooked, treated like that kid who never gets picked for dodgeball in primary school. And supposedly, this is catastrophic for Australian foreign policy. Because apparently, if you can't get a meeting in the Oval Office, you might as well pack up your kangaroos and go home. But hold on just a minute, because this entire storyline is built on some pretty shaky foundations. Now, before we dive deeper, let's talk about Trump for a second. The man's back in the White House after winning the 2024 election against Kamala Harris, and he's been busier than a one-armed bricklayer in Baghdad. He's got domestic chaos, international crisis management, and probably about 17 different legal battles to juggle. The bloke's calendar is more packed than a Sydney train during peak hour. So maybe, just maybe, the fact that Albanese hasn't gotten his meeting isn't actually the diplomatic Armageddon everyone's making it out to be. But here's where the plot thickens like your nan's gravy at Christmas dinner. Despite all the hand-wringing and pearl-clutching about this supposed diplomatic freeze-out, Trump has actually been rather complimentary about Albanese. Yeah, you heard that right. Trump called Albanese a good man. Now, for Trump, that's practically a marriage proposal. The bloke doesn't hand out compliments like they're party favors. When Trump says you're a good man, that's significant. That's Trump speak for "I don't completely despise you," which in his world, is practically a ticker tape parade. So what's really going on here? Why the disconnect between the narrative of neglect and the reality of mutual respect? Here's a theory that'll blow your mind, like finding out your favorite childhood TV show was actually terrible. Maybe, just maybe, both Albanese and Trump are playing a similar political game. And I'm not talking about golf, though Trump would probably be better at that. I'm talking about the art of appearing strong to your base while navigating the impossible expectations of modern politics. Both of these blokes are dealing with populations that are increasingly divided, increasingly angry, and increasingly convinced that the other side is actively trying to destroy civilization as we know it. Let's break this down because it's absolutely fascinating when you think about it. Trump won his election by leaning hard into populist rhetoric, promising to put America first, and positioning himself as the ultimate political outsider despite being, a former president. His whole shtick is about being the tough guy who doesn't play by establishment rules. Meanwhile, Albanese has been trying to navigate Australian politics by positioning himself as the reasonable alternative to the coalition's chaos, while also trying not to alienate the more progressive wing of Labor. Different strategies, different contexts, but both are fundamentally about managing expectations and projecting strength. And here's where they share some genuinely common ground that nobody's really talking about. Both Trump and Albanese are dealing with the challenge of protectionism versus globalization. Trump's America First agenda isn't that different from the increasing pressure on Albanese to prioritize Australian manufacturing, Australian jobs, and Australian interests over free trade idealism. They're both navigating economies where the working class feels left behind by decades of neoliberal economic policy. They're both dealing with electorates that are skeptical of immigration, worried about housing affordability, and convinced that politicians are more interested in virtue signaling than actually fixing problems. Now, I can hear the keyboards clacking already. How dare you compare Albanese to Trump? Look, I'm not saying they're identical twins separated at birth. Trump's about as subtle as a brick through a window, while Albanese is more of a death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of operator. But politically, they're both trying to thread the same impossible needle of keeping their traditional bases happy while not completely alienating everyone else. Let's talk about the United Nations General Assembly coming up in New York, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Albanese is heading over there, and naturally, everyone's going to be watching to see if he can finally snag that elusive Trump meeting. The speculation is going to be more intense than a cricket match between Australia and England. Will he? Won't he? Is this finally the moment? It's like a geopolitical soap opera, and honestly, I'm here for it. But here's what the critics are missing entirely. The obsession with this meeting reveals more about our outdated understanding of diplomacy than it does about Albanese's effectiveness. We're still operating under this Cold War mentality where everything hinges on big important meetings between world leaders, complete with photo opportunities and joint press conferences. But modern diplomacy doesn't actually work that way anymore. Some of the most important international agreements are hammered out by bureaucrats in windowless rooms while the leaders are off doing photo ops elsewhere. Australia's relationship with America isn't going to live or die based on whether Albanese gets his 15 minutes with Trump in the Oval Office. It's going to be determined by defense agreements, trade relationships, intelligence sharing, and 100 other boring but crucial details that never make the front page. AUKUS didn't happen because Scott Morrison and Joe Biden were best mates who braided each other's hair. It happened because it served both countries' strategic interests. And speaking of strategic interests, let's get real for a second. Both Trump and Albanese understand that the world is shifting. China's rise isn't slowing down, regardless of how many tariffs Trump slaps on Chinese goods or how many stern statements Albanese makes about foreign interference. Both leaders are trying to position their countries for a future where the old certainties of the post-World War II order are crumbling faster than a Tim Tam and hot tea. They're both dealing with the reality that the rules-based international order everyone keeps talking about is looking increasingly more like guidelines than actual rules. Here's another piece of common ground that's absolutely delicious. Both Trump and Albanese have had to deal with their own parties thinking they're not going far enough. Trump's got the mega faithful who think he's too soft on various issues, while Albanese's got the labor left who think he's basically running a coalition government with better branding. They're both trying to keep their political families together while the centrifugal forces of modern politics try to tear everything apart. It's like trying to herd cats, except the cats are politically motivated and have Twitter accounts. The media's obsession with this meeting also reveals something fascinating about how we consume political news. We want drama, we want conflict, we want something we can sink our teeth into. Prime Minister conducts productive but unremarkable diplomatic engagement doesn't exactly set the pulse racing, does it? But Prime Minister snubbed by Trump in diplomatic disaster gets the clicks, gets the shares, gets everyone arguing in the comments. The truth is probably somewhere in between, which is deeply unsatisfying for everyone involved. Now, whether Albanese actually gets his meeting with Trump at the UN General Assembly or not, here's what's going to happen. If he does, critics will say it took too long and it's only happening because of public pressure. If he doesn't, they'll say it proves Australia's irrelevance on the world stage. It's a no-win situation, which is basically every politician's daily existence summed up in one neat little package. But the reality that nobody wants to acknowledge is that Trump and Albanese are both products of the same global political moment. They're both dealing with electorates that are angry, divided, and desperately looking for someone to blame for why things feel so unstable. They're both trying to navigate an international system that's creaking under the weight of multiple crises. And they're both discovering that the old playbook doesn't work anymore, but nobody's quite sure what the new playbook should look like. So when Trump calls Albanese a good man, maybe he actually means it. Not because they're ideological soulmates or because they're going to become best buddies, but because Trump recognizes someone else who's trying to navigate the same impossible political landscape. They might have completely different styles, completely different policies, and completely different hair situations, but they're both trying to keep their heads above water in a political environment that's become increasingly toxic and polarist. The common ground isn't about policy details or shared ideology. It's about the fundamental challenge of governing in an era where everything is politicized, where every decision is scrutinized by armies of online critics, and where the gap between what voters want and what's actually achievable seems to grow wider every single day. That's the real story here, not whether two blokes manage to find 30 minutes in their calendars to shake hands in front of cameras. Thanks for watching, legends. Until next time, keep questioning everything, and remember,